let's jump into the high-stakes world of the FBI hostage negotiation team.
Yeah, their techniques are fascinating.
Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference.
Which is full of incredible stories from his time as an FBI hostage negotiator.
Exactly.
His approach is really interesting because it kind of goes against a lot of the traditional negotiation wisdom.
Yeah, like the whole win-win, being calm and rational thing.
Yeah.
Voss basically throws all that out the window.
He kind of had to.
He had to.
He talks about this time he walked into this like a hostage situation.
At Harvard Law School.
At Harvard Law School.
You thought it was going to be like a calm academic discussion with some professors.
Right, and they hit him with this crazy scenario like, we've got your son, give us $1 million or he dies.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about a curveball to start your training.
Can you imagine that?
Oh, absolutely.
I can only imagine the pressure, even though it was fake.
Even though it was fake.
It really shows how much emotions play a role in negotiation.
Yeah.
Even for someone at his level.
Even for someone at his level of expertise.
Yeah.
It makes you think, maybe this traditional negotiation theory that's so focused on logic and rationality.
Yeah.
Maybe it's missing something.
Right. And Voss talks about the work of Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, yeah. Fascinating stuff.
The Nobel Prize winner.
Yes.
For studying how our brains work.
Absolutely.
And Kahneman discovered that, we often make decisions based on these like unconscious biases.
Right.
Not pure logic.
Not pure logic, no.
So the FBE, dealing with these life or death situations, they couldn't just assume these hostage takers are going to be perfectly rational.
Of course not.
They had to understand the psychology.
Exactly.
And that's what makes Voss's book so powerful.
So powerful.
It blends these like academic insights with these real-world tactics.
He calls hostage negotiation emotional intelligence on steroids.
Wow.
So you have to connect with somebody on such a deep level, often in a short amount of time.
In these very intense situations.
Exactly.
But these skills are valuable in everyday life, too.
Oh, yeah.
Voss makes the case that whether you're negotiating a salary or figuring out what's for dinner with your family,
absolutely,
understanding emotional intelligence is key.
It's so important.
Yep.
So let's dive into some of the tactics that he lays out in the book.
Okay.
One of the most interesting ones is this idea of mirroring.
Mirroring, yeah.
It sounds so simple.
Yeah.
You just repeat the last few words of what someone has said.
Like a verbal echo.
Like a verbal echo.
Okay.
But there's an art to it.
Okay.
You have to do it with this curious, inquisitive tone.
Right.
Not like you're mocking them.
Right.
Voss actually used this in a bank robbery standoff.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine the pressure in that situation.
I can't even imagine.
And it worked.
It worked.
By mirroring the robber, he was able to build rapport.
Wow.
Even though they were in this crazy, chaotic situation.
Yeah.
And it taps into this fundamental human need for connection. We tend to trust people that we see as similar to ourselves.
That makes sense.
And mirroring subtly creates that sense of similarity, which opens the door for communication.
So it kind of disarms people in a way.
It does.
Voss actually mentions a study where waiters who used mirroring got significantly higher tips.
That's wild.
Isn't that interesting?
It really is.
Like this little tweak in your communication.
Right.
That can make a huge difference.
And there's a neurological explanation for it.
Oh, there is.
When we closely observe someone, our brain activity actually starts to align with theirs.
Wow.
It's called neural resonance.
So our brains are like trying to get in sync.
Trying to get in sync.
That's so interesting.
It's not just psychology. There's real science behind this.
That's fascinating.
But mirroring isn't the only tool in Voss's toolkit.
Okay, so what else is there?
Well, he also talks about the power of labeling.
Labeling, what is that?
So labeling takes mirroring a step further. It's about actually giving a name to the other person's emotions.
Oh.
So you might say something like, it seems like you're feeling frustrated.
Okay.
Or, it sounds like you're concerned about this.
So you're acknowledging their emotions explicitly.
You are.
Okay.
And it can be super effective, especially when you're dealing with negative feelings.
Interesting.
One of Voss's students used labeling to avoid having to make thousands of copies of a document.
Oh my gosh.
So her boss, who was very old school, told her to make 2 copies of everything.
Can you imagine the paper cuts?
All that paper. But instead of arguing with him, she mirrored his request.
Oh, so she said like 2 copies?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that forced him to pause
and
consider what he was really asking for.
So that act of labeling kind of changed the dynamic.
It did.
Of the conversation.
It changed the whole dynamic.
That's amazing.
It's so powerful.
So it's not just about repeating their words.
Right.
It's about naming the emotion.
It's about naming the emotion.
Okay.
And it can be indirect, too.
Yeah.
It's just about acknowledging that emotion.
Got it.
And it takes away some of its power.
Yeah.
It becomes less scary, less manageable.
Okay.
Which allows for a more rational discussion.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It is.
How these little tweaks in communication can make such a big difference.
Yeah, it's all about the psychology.
Absolutely.
Of persuasion.
Of persuasion, of connection.
Of connection, yeah. So we've seen how mirroring and labeling can help us, connect with the other person.
Build that rapport.
Yeah, and understand their perspective better.
Exactly.
But what about when we need to establish our own boundaries?
Ah, yes. Voss has a really interesting take on that.
Yeah.
He encourages us to embrace the power of no.
Which seems so counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Especially in a negotiation.
We're so conditioned to think that, saying yes is always the right answer.
Yeah, like you want to be agreeable.
You want to please people.
Yeah.
But it's like those telemarketing calls.
Oh, yeah.
Where they just bombard you with questions that are designed to get you to say yes.
Yeah.
Are you happy with your current phone plan? Would you like to save money?
Right.
And before you know it, you've signed up for something you didn't even want.
Exactly.
Voss argues that saying no can actually be more valuable
than saying yes.
than saying yes.
Really?
At least in those early stages of a negotiation.
Interesting, because a yes can be so superficial.
It can.
It's almost like a counterfeit. Yes.
Exactly. It's like a way to avoid conflict
right.
without really committing to anything.
Okay.
Whereas a no forces the conversation to go deeper.
It does, yeah.
It compels the other person to explain their reasoning.
Okay.
To address your concerns.
And it gives you that sense of control.
Right.
Which is so important in any negotiation.
Absolutely.
You're not just passively agreeing. You're actively shaping the conversation.
You're in the driver's seat.
And Voss even shares a personal anecdote about this power of no.
Oh, yeah.
When he first applied to be an FBI hostage negotiator, he was rejected.
What?
They told him he didn't have enough experience.
Wow.
Which must have been a blow.
It must have been.
But that no actually set him on a path.
Okay.
That led him to becoming one of the FBI's top negotiators.
That's amazing.
So sometimes a no is just the beginning of a more interesting and productive conversation.
It's not the end, it's the beginning.
Yeah.
It's like a door closing, but another one opening.
Okay.
Voss also makes this distinction between getting to yes and getting to that's right.
Interesting.
The difference. She's the difference.
Well, yes can be a sign of compliance.
Okay.
Signifies true understanding and agreement.
So like that aha moment.
Exactly.
When both sides are truly on the same page.
You got it.
Voss tells this great story about working with this professional football player who had this irrational fear of getting hit.
Which is a problem in his line of work.
To say the least. Say the least.
And Voss used labeling to help the player kind of confront his beliefs.
Okay.
And he said something like, it seems like you believe that if you avoid getting hit, you'll be a better player.
So he's putting those beliefs into words.
Yeah.
And forcing the player to acknowledge them.
Right.
And the player finally says, that's right.
Okay.
Recognizing the absurdity of his fear.
And that helped him overcome his mental block.
Wow.
He started playing with more confidence and aggression.
Because he'd moved beyond just agreeing with a different perspective.
Yeah.
He had internalized it.
He owned it.
He owned it.
Yeah.
So it's not about winning the argument.
It's about achieving that shared understanding.
That's right.
But negotiation isn't always this one-on-one situation.
Right.
Voss talks about these hidden players.
Those behind-the-scenes influencers.
Yeah, the people behind the scenes who can really influence the outcome.
Yeah, he calls them level 2 players.
Level 2 players, okay.
So it might be bosses, spouses, board members.
Anyone who has a stake in the negotiation.
But who aren't directly involved.
And those level 2 players can really throw a wrench in things.
Oh, they can.
If you're not aware of their influence.
Absolutely.
Like, imagine you're negotiating a business deal.
Right.
You think you've got everything lined up.
Everything's perfect.
And then the CEO, who you haven't even met, comes in and changes all the terms.
Ugh. I hate when that happens. Or in a hostage situation.
Yeah.
The hostage taker might seem cooperative.
Yeah.
But there's someone behind the scenes pulling the strings.
So Voss emphasizes the importance of asking these calibrated questions.
Yes.
To uncover the motivations and the influence of these hidden players.
Absolutely.
What are some examples of those questions?
Well, you might ask, how does this affect everyone else? Or how on board is the rest of your team?
So you're getting them to think beyond just their own immediate perspective.
Exactly.
And consider the bigger picture.
You're playing chess.
You got to think several moves ahead.
You got to think several moves ahead.
Okay, so you need to understand the entire playing field.
Not just the pieces right in front of you.
Not just what's on the surface.
Exactly.
Okay. And then Voss also talks about these game-changing pieces of information he calls black swans.
Yes. Black swans.
Can you elaborate on what those are?
A black swan is like a piece of information that's completely unexpected,
Okay.
but has this massive impact on the situation.
So like those moments when you realize you've been operating under completely false assumptions?
Exactly.
So how do we get better at spotting these black swans?
It takes a shift in mindset.
Okay.
You have to be open to information that seems strange,
Great.
irrational,
Like those things that don't fit the narrative.
the narrative that we've built in our heads.
So instead of dismissing those weird details or inconsistencies,
Right.
we should actually pay more attention to them.
They could hold the key
Yeah.
to unlocking the true dynamics of the negotiation.
Voss shares a tragic story from his FBI days,
About a bank robbery hostage situation.
where the negotiator missed these crucial black swans.
And it highlights how failing to recognize that unexpected information
Yeah.
can have devastating consequences.
So important to be aware of this.
Absolutely. And he also gives an example from the business world
Okay.
where a deal almost fell apart because they missed a black swan.
Really?
The company they were negotiating with had this hidden financial constraint
Oh.
that they were too embarrassed to admit.
And if they had dug a little deeper and asked the right questions.
They could have saved themselves so much trouble.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It is.
And Voss has a specific tool for this.
He does calibrated how questions.
Calibrated how questions.
Yes.
Tell me more about those.
So these how questions are designed to encourage the other side to explain their reasoning,
Okay.
which often reveals those hidden motives or constraints.
So they're really good at unlocking information
They are.
that wouldn't have surfaced otherwise.
So instead of asking why questions.
That can put people on the defensive.
Exactly.
We should focus on how questions.
How questions invite that collaboration,
Yeah.
problem solving.
It's amazing how these subtle shifts in language
Right.
can make such a big difference in a negotiation.
It all comes back to the psychology of communication.
Yeah, understanding how people's minds work.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Mirroring, labeling, the power of
Level 2 players?
black swans, calibrated questions.
It's a whole toolkit.
It is. And while we've been focusing on Chris Voss and his experiences as an FBI hostage negotiator,
Yeah.
these techniques apply to so many different areas of life.
Oh, they do.
Negotiation is everywhere.
It is.
Whether you're dealing with your boss,
Your kids,
your kids,
or even just trying to get a good deal on a car,
right.
these principles can help.
Yeah. It's about becoming a more skillful communicator,
Absolutely.
understanding human behavior,
Yes.
building stronger relationships.
It's about connection.
It is.
Voss's book is a great reminder that negotiation isn't about manipulation
Or trickery.
or trickery.
It's about finding common ground
Creating win-win outcomes
and approaching every interaction.
with empathy and understanding.
Yeah, with that human touch.
Exactly.
All right, so let's move on to the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've explored so many fascinating tactics from Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference.
It's really a treasure trove of insights.
It is, but there's one more concept I want to dig into.
Okay.
Normative leverage. What is that?
It's all about understanding the other side's religion.
The religion.
Yeah, and Voss doesn't necessarily mean like their actual religious beliefs.
Right.
Although it could include that.
There's more about their core values.
Exactly. Their guiding principles, what they consider right and wrong.
Like their code of conduct.
Their code of conduct, yeah.
And once you understand
Once
that,
you understand what drives them.
you can use that knowledge in the negotiation.
To your advantage, absolutely.
Can you give me an example of how that works in practice?
Sure, Voss describes the situation where he had to negotiate with a farmer.
A farmer.
Yeah, this farmer drove a tractor into a pond in Washington, D.C.
What?
and was threatening to blow it up with what he claimed were bombs.
Wow, that sounds intense.
It was a high-stakes situation.
Yeah.
And Voss and his team had to figure out, what was this guy's motivation?
What was his religion?
What was his religion? Yeah.
And what did they discover?
Well, it turned out this farmer was deeply passionate about the plight of tobacco farmers.
Okay.
He felt like the government was ignoring their struggles, driving them out of business.
So his actions were driven by this sense of injustice.
Exactly. He wanted his voice to be heard.
Okay.
And once Voss understood that, he could tailor his communication accordingly.
So they emphasized that they were listening.
Right. They wanted to help him get his message out.
So by tapping into a sense of fairness,
His core values.
yeah, they were able to de-escalate the situation.
They were-
Wow, and this principle applies to all sorts of negotiations.
It does.
By taking the time to understand what truly motivates the other side,
What they consider fair and right.
yeah, we gain a powerful form of leverage.
We do.
It's like finding that secret back door that leads to a breakthrough.
It is.
But Voss also highlights another interesting concept, the similarity principle.
Oh, yes. This one's rooted in the idea that we tend to trust and concede to people we see as similar to ourselves.
Makes sense. We gravitate towards those we perceive as being like us.
We do.
But how do we leverage that in a negotiation?
It's about finding common ground.
Okay.
Maybe you grew up in the same town, went to the same school,
Right.
or even just share a love for the same sports team.
So even small similarities can create that connection.
Absolutely, and that connection is crucial for building rapport and trust.
It's fascinating how much psychology goes into effective negotiation.
It really is.
It's not just about logic and strategy.
It's about understanding human nature.
Yeah, it's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
Absolutely, and Never Split the Difference is a fantastic resource
It is.
for anyone who wants to improve those skills,
Yeah.
whether it's in their personal or professional lives.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
from mirroring and labeling,
The power of no.
and the importance of uncovering those black swans.
And understanding those level 2 players.
I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for approaching those difficult conversations.
That's great to hear.
And remember, these techniques aren't about manipulation or trickery.
No, not at all.
It's about building trust
Finding common ground.
and creating those win-win outcomes
Exactly. It's about approaching every interaction
with empathy
and understand.
and that human touch.
That's what it's all about.
So to our listeners out there, the next time you find yourself in a tricky situation,
A tough conversation.
remember Chris Voss.
And the FBI hostage negotiators.
Remember the power of emotional intelligence
The art of listening.
and the importance of finding that's right moment.
Yo, don't be afraid to say no.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive
We hope you found it insightful.
and empowering.
Until next time.
Happy negotiating.